Okay, well, here we are. Um, our long-awaited sparrows presentation by Dave Dister. Um, Certainly an area that I definitely need help with. I'm hoping he IDs the sparrow on the very first page here. Um, so what we have now, everybody that's watching is not going to be heard. So if you've got a question, you've got the option at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a chat button. You can type in a question, or you can wait till the end and we'll unmute everybody and everybody can then ask a question. Okay. And then I want to remind everybody for the field trip on Saturday down to the Otto Nature Preserve, 8 o'clock meet at the airport. Um, that's down in Oceana County. Susie Knoll will be leading that trip. Okay. So Dave, I'll turn it over to you. Okay. Thank you very much for doing this.
Well, thank you, Joe. I've given PowerPoint programs on gulls, on shorebirds, on waterfowl, but the sparrows are a lot smaller and, as you might imagine, typically more difficult to identify. I imagine in the future I may have a Sparrows and Allies ID 102. I managed to upload audio for 7 of the 20 sparrows here at a last minute effort. Plus, although many of the photos are mine, some were from other people and their names are credited. I've also taken a few from the Cornell website and I've credited the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in that case as well. I guess we'll just get started. The bird on the title slide is an immature white-crowned sparrow, and it's an interesting pose because the bird's body is facing away, but it's turning and looking at sideways a little bit at the photographer. And if anybody's interested in plumage details, I think you could probably determine the exact age of this bird by the pattern on the feathers, the flight feathers. Pretty interesting here. Anyway, let's see. I'm trying to page down, and that is not functioning. There we go. So, sparrows and allies, and we will talk a little bit more about allies. We have a couple birds that are not actually sparrow per se, but we have all combined 20 species of these sparrows and allies documented in Mason County. Throughout the state of Michigan, there are 29 species, and then in all of North America, 43 species. So it's somewhat surprising that we have almost half of the species of sparrows and allies in North America documented for Mason County. We're not going to go into great detail on sparrow topography, but some of the major things to look for when you do see a sparrow, because you might only have a few minutes at the most, or maybe a few seconds. The head in general is probably the best single part of the bird to get a good view of. Obviously, the bill, and I would say the crown and the nape, which is the upper part of the back of the head. In addition to that, the throat and breast and belly All can be just plain, or they could have stripes on them. And then the tail could have a particular color or pattern as well. In the case of sparrows, I don't think undertail coverts are referenced at all. Now we have more detail on the head, as you can imagine. And again, we're not going to be using all these terms, but one that's useful for white-throated sparrow, for example, is the term lores, which is between the eye and the bill. And as you might know, with white-throated sparrow, that area has a bright yellow spot typically on the adult birds. We use the term upper mandible and lower mandible, or upper bill and lower bill. Sometimes the color is different on a particular bird. There's a difference between chin and throat, which is a subtle thing. Mallard stripe is often used. Quite a few sparrows have that dark area. The nape, as I said in the previous illustration, is the upper back at the neck area. Eye ring can be very useful, whether it has an eye ring or not. The supercilium is often used. That is the area above the eye, which often is very light colored. And then sometimes sparrows have crown stripes. If the stripe is in the middle of the top of the crown, that's called a median crown stripe. If it's on the sides, those are called lateral crown stripes. The top rarities in Mason County, simply by the number of times birds have been seen. We only have one record of Nelson sparrow, two birds that I saw with a friend of mine from Ohio who was visiting. We were at the state park and saw two Nelson sparrows in the beach grass just north of the mouth of the river. That was May 19th, 2013. That was rare enough I had to write up a rare bird document. Then we have two records of Lark sparrow, one from 1983. The most recent one was April 8th, 2012, and that was seen by Bob Brockwell and his daughter. LeConte sparrow has been seen twice. I think the early 73 record was Ethel Getgood, and the May 2000 record was from our biology, ornithology teacher at the college, Rex Benfield. Harris's sparrows, we have at least 8 records dating back to 1968. They don't show up every year, obviously. And then Henslows, only about 12 records as far as I can tell, starting in the 1980s. And the last Henslows that I was aware of is 2013, when I heard one at dawn in the Pere Marquette Marsh during the spring bird count. So Towhees, sparrows, and juncos are all in the family Emberizidae. And we'll start with the eastern towhee. And this sparrow ally is obviously the largest of any of the birds we're going to be seeing here. It's kind of like a slim version of a robin, with a long black tail on the male. All the upper parts are dark with a dark hood, and then a chestnut colored along the side, and white belly and breast. Females, instead of black, it's pretty much just gray on the hood and the back and the wings, with a little bit of chestnut underneath the wing, and again, white belly. Just for fun, I happen to have a photo of a towhee nest. And anybody who's a botanist would say, oh, this was in a very dry area. because those seedlings are black oak seedlings, and they occur in dry oak pine barrens, like, for example, at the state park. And then there's a little bit of bearberry, which again is typical of those dry areas. And this is unusual. This was a juvenile towhee that I photographed at the edge of the black spruce bog at Nordhaus Dunes. Towhees are not considered a bog bird, but who knows, being a fledgling or juvenile, it might have flown quite a ways from its normal habitat. And in fact, it's in a tamarack tree, of all things. So that was kind of strange. Okay, so let's see if our Towhee song here works out. Okay, if you look in bird guides, they will say a phrase like "drink your tea" with a little tremulo at the end, and so that's pretty easy to describe. Our next bird is the American tree sparrow. And in this case, I'm adding arrows for some of the key identification marks. This is unusual. I think this may be the only sparrow where the upper bill is usually dark and the lower bill is usually yellowish. Another interesting ID feature would be that white wing bar on the side of the wings. But of course, this is not a frontal view. Here we got a frontal view of an American tree sparrow, and that dark spot is a key feature. Virtually all tree sparrows have that on a plain gray breast. And their crown, as adults, the crown is just a rusty reddish brown with no striping through it at all. And we have a tree sparrow song here. Kind of an odd song, and in fact, we don't even hear it much in migration because tree sparrows don't breed anywhere near the Great Lakes. They're breeding way up in the tundra habitats. Next bird is chipping sparrow, and the adult bird has a solid grayish brown crown. Also has a grayish face in general, and this doesn't show it too well, but the line above the eye and the dark eye line above that is a little bit paler gray or whitish, and some birds it's quite white. Adults in winter look totally different. So if you hear people saying they saw a chipping sparrow in winter and it had a solid red crown, well, that's a misidentification because they all have striped crowns and are extremely rare even in southern Michigan, because they typically winter farther south. And you can barely see the white little chin there on this winter adult. Here is an immature, also with a white chin, but this was not taken in late fall, so this was a bird that was taken probably middle of summer. And again, here's one that looks like it's just out of the nest. It's hard to tell. Hard to tell it even has a white chin or no rusty on the crown, so that makes identification of a bird just out of the nest quite difficult. And we've got a song for chipping sparrows. The interesting thing is chipping sparrows are used as a reference for other birds that have a chipping type song. Actually, our last bird on this whole list today will be the dark-eyed Junco, but it has a more musical type of a chipping. Then you have pine warblers, which is slower than a chipping sparrow. So they're right there. You have 3 species in different categories that have a chipping type song. Clay-colored sparrow is one of our rarest breeding sparrows. The Mormon property has quite a few nesting in the old field areas in between the overgrown Christmas trees, which are blue spruce and probably 30 to 40 years old. They do like dry habitats. And for identification, it has a overall kind of a darkish crown, but there's a white stripe going very much through the center of the crown. The nape area is just a plain gray, and then the eye stripe above the eye is a lot paler than the cheek area, which is kind of a buffy color. Here we have a slightly different clay-colored sparrow. And looking straight on, it's pretty easy to see that central or median crown stripe when the bird's looking directly at you. And we've got a song here. It's hard to say it's really a song. It's pretty strange. So basically, it's a buzz, 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 buzz. Sounds more like an insect. But fortunately, there's no other bird in this part of the country that has anything that sounds similar. It doesn't carry very far either, as you might imagine. Our next bird is the field sparrow. Again, 2 major keys for ID, the bold white eye ring and the bill, which is entirely pinkish. Otherwise, the bird has no stripes at all on the breast or belly. It does have a little bit of a wing bar, and the rusty color on the behind the eye and on the crown is kind of washed out. Field sparrows are often seen on the ground. This probably was on the lawn at the state park. And there's a very distinctive song for the field sparrow. So they had a couple of clear notes and then a trill that speeds up at the end. Kind of reminds some people of a ping pong ball, because if you drop a ping pong ball, it increases in speed at the end. So I can play that one more time if that was not obvious. And that field sparrow song also is not one that carries nearly as far as say a Savannah sparrow or one of these other open prairie type sparrows. Now, Vesper Sparrow is an open country bird that breeds here. Unfortunately, I don't have a good photo that shows the adults that typically have a reddish shoulder patch. And of course, from this angle, you can't see the top of the tail feathers, but if a bird's flying away from you, which typically happens if you're birding, it'll be pretty obvious on an adult Vesper sparrow. The outer tail feathers are bright white, with the rest of the tail being dark. And it has a bold eye ring. It's also a little more winter hardy than some other migrant sparrows. This happened to be a late snowstorm a couple years ago, and I went up to Sherman Township along Town Line Road and found a Vesper sparrow that normally wouldn't be close to the road, but it found a source of food and was actively eating from looks like amaranth or some other kind of a weed here. And it was just fascinating because I'm only 30 feet away, and interesting to see it stretching, trying to pick out the seeds. And then it got fed up with me, and just it was a funny looking bird, but you can come up with your own caption there. It turns out we had a Vesper Sparrow on the Christmas bird count in Oceana County a couple of years ago. And a key thing was seeing the white eye rings. And here we have the song of the Vesper. But the Vesper Sparrow song sounds very similar to the song sparrow, but you might recall the song sparrow typically starts off with 3 flat calls and then goes into a little tremulous part of the song. So for Vesper, it starts off typically with 2 call notes. Well, it sounds more like 3 there, but sometimes there's some variation apparently. Okay, now we have one of our rare sparrows that is rare anywhere in Michigan, called the Lark Sparrow. This is a photo from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and this is an adult bird. So very boldly patterned. That rusty cheek patch behind and below the eye is distinctive, and the rusty crown as well. The tail is almost entirely black with a little bit of white edging. Other than that, some books say that Lark Sparrow has kind of a quail-like head to it. Because it's kind of black and white, variegated, and a little bit of rusty brown mixed in as well. And here's another. If you see the bird head on, it'll have a breast spot, dark spot on the breast, which is otherwise just a grayish white. And happened, well, on my trip to Wyoming several years ago in Nebraska, I found an immature lark sparrow, and this was August 10th, 2017. And you can see the head looks very similar to the adult, but the rest of the bird is not nearly as dark reddish. this is a very distinct song. That's a quite intricate variation of chips and songs and trills. So you might want to keep that in the back of your mind, because if you hear that, there's nothing out that sounds like that, and that would be a rare bird worth contacting everybody you can as soon as possible. I've never seen one in the county. Savannah sparrow, kind of similar to the Vesper as far as breeding in vast open grasslands and fields that don't have too many woody plants. And you might notice here, that yellow stripe above the eye is sometimes quite bold. Most adult savannas have that to varying degrees of yellow. Then there's a pale stripe going through the crown, and the breast has some heavy dark markings on a plain gray breast otherwise. You see again, that bright yellow stands out quite well. And some of these Savannah sparrows have a little bit of reddish in the wings, especially what's termed a reddish form. This was in the fall at the harbor. You can still see a little bit of yellowish there between the eye and the bill, and a little white stripe through the top of the dark crown. But that reddish on the wings is older than most savannas. Plus the striping is very heavy. It could be this might be an immature bird. It looks a lot different than the previous savannas. Grasshopper sparrow, a bird that you hear far more than you see, but they're still very uncommon to rare as a breeder in Mason County and even adjacent counties. They need vast areas of very short grass, or if not that, like a pasture. If you don't have that, then most airports do quite well and attract grasshopper sparrows, and you usually have a few at our Mason County Airport. Also, the slopes of the pump storage reservoir, there's some there. But again, you're going to hear them far more than see them. Note that yellow spot that's above the eye, almost yellowish orange. There's a pale stripe through the crown. Oh, the other thing is with grasshopper sparrow, it has kind of a flattish head. And then there is a pale eye ring. Otherwise, the bird kind of looks washed out. There aren't any dark browns or dark reddish. Of course, this is a couple photos from Linda Scribner. I appreciate having her contribute to this program for a bird that's seldom easily seen. Seems to be quite shy, hiding in the grasses. Now, from now on, we haven't had a audio because I didn't have time to upload those for all the other species. Henslow sparrows, as I said, is one of our rarer birds, and I'm not sure we have confirmation of breeding. We may have a probable breeder in some of the previous breeding bird atlas programs in the past across the state. And it's a bird that you don't see all that often either, but it's even pickier than other sparrows. It prefers a vast grassy meadow with no more than one small shrub per acre, basically. And And that kind of habitat is hard to come by. And as you can imagine, if you have a field that's nothing but grass, 50 acres or so, that's not going to be suitable. If you have 50 acres with a couple hundred shrubs, that's too many shrubs. So it's quite a picky bird, which is probably one reason why it's rare and declining throughout its range here in the east. The interesting thing are the colors. Note the head is overall kind of an olive green, whereas the wings have reddish tones in them. There's no other sparrow in the east, at least, that has reddish and olive combined. If you get a good look at it, which again is not easy. And then you can see it does have a pale stripe through the dark crown as well. And here's a good view from the rear and the back. You can see the olive and blackish head and nape in contrast to the reddish back and wings, which is quite dramatic. And of course, here we have one in the singing mode. Not too much in the way of stripes just on the very edge, maybe the shoulder area near the bend of the wing. And LeConte, only have a couple records of that. This was at Arcadia Marsh, and Linda Scribner took this September 29th, 2013. There are two sparrows that are very rare, that have orangish brown coloring around the head. And this also has not a real dark crown, but darker stripes with a pale stripe through the center of the crown. And then there's some striping on the nape area, which is a grayish. And that's critical because the species after this, the Nelson sparrow, looks very similar. So this is a bird that I saw with a friend of mine from Ohio visiting up at the park on May 19th, 2013. We saw a pair of these birds, and it's a darker orange in this case, but the strength of the orange on the head can vary quite a bit for both of these species. But then the second arrow on the nape, it shows a little band of gray, but there's no dark striping through it. This is obviously not a very good photo, but this bird was amazing. It was running through the beach grass like it was a mouse. And that's typical for a Nelson sparrow that breeds way up in Canada. Here's a different photo from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, again showing the gray band on the nape there with no striping through it. Now for a bird that we're a lot more familiar with, the fox sparrow, which happens to be one of our larger sparrows. Boy, this sparrow has so many interesting things, you can't mistake it for anything. Overall, the bird has a lot of gray in the head and a lot of rufous red in the rest of the plumage. So you can see here above the eye it's gray, and below the eye it's chestnut red. Then the back has some alternating reddish brown with pale gray banding. And then on the breast and belly has a real dark rusty, and what are termed chevrons or upside down V shapes are very distinctive, especially when looking head on. And it's just stunning. To me, it looks like a mountain scene with all these mountain peaks So if people haven't realized how cool this sparrow is looking at the front breast, it's just like a work of art. Then for a different perspective, looking at the bird as the body is facing away, but its head is sideways, so it's very distinctive. It has a pretty uniformly dark reddish tail, and the lower wing feathers are very dark red as well. And our popular song sparrow are probably most numerous of any of the breeding sparrows anywhere in the Great Lakes. It does have a darkish crown, a very medium gray supercilium line above the eye, and then a dark eyeline stripe that bends down onto the neck. The clincher is seeing a song sparrow from a frontal view, and here that first arrow below the eye is pointing to a dark mallard stripe, whereas the second arrow down is pointing to the dark spot. So you could call this a spot-breasted sparrow to some degree. And it has heavy stripes on a pale gray background. And then the head is a combination of rusty and gray stripes. And again, just another typical view. That spot on the breast may not be perfectly circular, may be just kind of a smudge, as in this particular individual. Lincoln sparrow, very interesting bird we don't see too many of because they breed in the UP and further north in wetlands. It was named after Abraham Lincoln by early ornithologists, and the bird tends to be kind of shy, and I guess from what I've heard, Lincoln was not particularly as outgoing as people may have thought. So maybe that's why it was named after him. The Lincoln sparrow has some interesting features. It has a pale eye ring, kind of a light buffy gray. There's a little bit of white in the chin area, and it sometimes can have a little bit of a breast spot, although field guides don't show that typically. But that would be not as common as without a breast spot. However, the interesting thing is note the striping on the breast and the sides of the belly. Those brownish stripes are not nearly as bold as on a song sparrow. Plus, you can see that overall the head and the upper back and nape are far grayer than on a song sparrow. And they tend to be in wet areas like the alders along the paved walkway west of the dam at Ludington State Park. Here we have another view. You can see a little gray stripe through the reddish crown feathers. And I happen to take a view from the rear, which field guides don't show, but it's interesting that they have almost blackish stripes separated by wider medium gray stripes. So the view from the rear here would be distinctive for Lincoln sparrow if you didn't even have a photo of the front of the bird or the side. Here's an immature that looks a little scruffier than the previous birds above. swamp sparrow can look a little bit like Lincoln's, but there's a lot more white in the throat area. There's a dark wedge of black for the eye line expanding to the rear of the eye. So it's a somewhat triangular dark patch. Rusty crown, and then very reddish on the wings. Again, pale stripes similar to the Lincoln's, but still a little different. Not sure if this is a first spring bird. The plumage looks not nearly as reddish as the bird we just looked at. Swamp sparrows are uncommon, but widespread in wetlands across the area. Swamp sparrows have a chipping type song, by the way, but it's more slurred than a chipping sparrow. And here we have a juvenile that probably hadn't been out of the nest very long at all. This was September 6th, 2019 at the state park. Overall, kind of looks a little dingier than the adult. And a sparrow that's pretty neat looking when you see that yellow lores area between the eye and the bill. That's the brightest of any of our sparrows. And white throats and white crowned sparrows both are among our larger species of sparrows. So obviously the yellow laurel spot, and then of course the bold white stripe and black stripe above it. We have, and there's a thin white stripe in the median part of the crown. So overall, you're going to have two stripes on either side of that are dark, and then on the supercilium on either side of the head is bold white. And then, of course, the eye line is dark and it widens out, but not in the triangular fashion as some of our other birds. And of course, that has a white throat patch as an adult. Books will mention birds that are tan-striped, and it's a variation, probably not a subspecies. It's just a slight variation. It's not pure white, so it's kind of a buffy tan color, but otherwise looks similar. And in this case, at least, the yellow lores are kind of muted. And white-throated sparrow is a very rare breeder in Mason County. So I was fortunate to find a bird. It looks like it just left the nest a week or so ago. This was July 4th in 2016 up in Meade Township. I've heard singing white throats in the summer, not only in Meade, but in Sheridan and Logan and Eden Township. And they tend to be in areas that have swampy, wet habitats. Now we have Harris's sparrow. Again, this is a quite large sparrow, but it's a western bird that shows up very rarely. And interestingly, we've had, I don't know, 3 or 4 Harris's sparrows in the past 10 years at the state park. So people need to pay attention, especially at the bird feeders, because they'll sometimes show up feeding with the other birds on the ground or nearby. This was April 19th of 2019, and a photo taken by Linda Scribner. The adult birds are very distinctive. To somebody who's not a birder, they might think, well, that's a strange house sparrow. It's nothing at all close to a house sparrow. Of course, house sparrows are not truly a sparrow. they're a weaver finch. But Harris's has the very dark black crown and then patch around the bill, extending down to the throat and onto what you would call the bib area on the upper breast. And otherwise, very gray in the rest of the head. This was taken by Van Burmester October 4th, 2020 at the state park. And you'll note it doesn't look nearly as dark on the crown or around the face and the throat area. So it's considered a first winter because that means it was actually hatched in the summer. This, I believe, is probably the latest we've ever had a Harris's sparrow show up. Most of them tend to be in the springtime. And of course, that the whole side of the face is not gray at all. It's a light brown. So it definitely looks different. White-crowned sparrow. I think it's one of the most attractive sparrows we have. And again, look at the black and white striping on the crown. The bill color is paler than on white-throated sparrows. So if you happen to see the two side by side, obviously you don't see yellow lores on a white-crowned sparrow. You don't see a white throat that's really bold. It's pretty subtle here. But the bill color can be very useful to determine which sparrow you have. Here we have another. Notice it has a little black spot between the eye and that lateral crown stripe. Well, it turns out there's a western subspecies. Well, before we even get that, here's an immature. Those black and white crown stripes are on the immatures are gray and rusty. And here, when the bird turns toward you, it's pretty easy to see that the middle median crown stripe is a lot paler brown. And just another view from the rear on an immature. Pretty tricky. If you're not familiar with immatures, you might not even have a clue what kind of sparrow you have. Now for the Gambels. This bird has no black between the eye and the bill. And it's very subtle, but if you get some good photos and are able to look at them later, it's pretty easy to determine that. But normally these birds are moving pretty fast amongst other sparrows, white crowns. It's difficult to tell you have a Gambel's white crown. The Gambel's breeds from the west side of Hudson Bay on west, whereas the standard white crown sparrows that we see are breeding east of Hudson Bay all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So again, not very many records of Gambels. This was just taken for this spring, I believe. So, pretty cool bird. And our last species, the dark-eyed Junco. The males tend to be very dark, sometimes actually blackish. This is, I guess you'd just call it a slate gray. This used to be called a slate-colored Junco. And now it's referred to as dark-eyed Junco. An immature male will have a dark head, and then the rest of the plumage will be a medium gray with a little bit of hints of brown on the back there. On the other hand, the female could have a darker head, but there'll be a lot more brown on the back. And then if you have a female, there's no dark gray or blackish anywhere. The whole bird is kind of a mixture of light brown and gray. But you can get plumages all in between these, which makes determining whether you have a male or female or immature or adult quite challenging at times. And lastly, we have a subspecies called the Oregon Junco. And the males typically have a really dark head and a pretty dark brown on the rest of the body. The females, also a dark head, but not nearly as dark on the remainder of the body. And then you can't tell from here, well, I should say this female does show the bib effect quite well compared to a normal dark-eyed junco. And then lastly, Linda Scribner happened to find a leucistic dark-eyed junco, a bird that could be kind of tricky to identify, but juncos do tend to have pinkish bills. And so if this had a pink or a red eye and no color at all, it would probably be termed an albinistic junco. But because it has a dark eye and a little bit of brown, pale brown, it's not an albinistic bird. Leucistic is just a term meaning it does have some pigments after all. So for those that want to learn more about sparrows, I highly recommend these two guides, both by the same authors. They just traded who was the lead author. The first one on the left, it says by Academic Press. That book came out in the mid-90s, whereas this photographic guide to the sparrows of the U.S. and Canada came out 5 or 6 years ago, and is a good complement because the photos obviously show different variations than the paintings that are very good, but it's good to have comparison of both because, as you know, sparrows are difficult to identify and they're not just all brown and striped. So I guess that's the end of my program. I'm happy to take any questions anybody may have.
Mary, do you have any questions?
Well, I just am very impressed with the research that's gone into this by everyone and with the diversity and the number of different sparrows that we have, some of which we can see here in Michigan. And, oh, here I am. Okay. Also, Linda Scribner's photos were very well done too. And I appreciate the work behind all of this. It's like a PhD thesis in one species, sparrows.
It's challenging, and yeah, of course, I've only had a professional camera for 5 years, so I'm hoping to get better photos of sparrows in the future.
Well, I think what we have tonight was very well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
I almost think we need to take a sparrow-specific field trip.
Yeah.
It's I'm just completely I don't get them at all. I start seeing them and I can do white crowned and white-throated, and boy, once we start getting into fox, although fox sparrow seems pretty obvious, but
Right. Well, it also helps if you can hear the birds a minute or two before you actually see them.
Yeah.
Because the only sparrows that have very tricky songs are the ones that are real rare that I didn't have time to upload. But the LeConte and Nelson sparrows, it's just a little insect-like buzz. It's like I don't know that I could tell the difference between those.
Have you gone up to the area east of Arcadia, at grasslands, the Arcadia grasslands?
Yep, I've been there. Mm-hmm.
What would you expect to see up there? LeContes and Henslows and stuff?
Oh no, not LeConte. LeConte breeds in the UP and further north. Now LeConte may stop by the marsh briefly on its way north.
Well, not the marsh, but the grasslands. They got a grasslands east of the marsh.
Right. Yeah, that might have Henslows, but I don't know enough. I don't know that they're breeding there because I think Linda would have mentioned it.
Okay.
But I know for sure they'll have Vesper and Savannah. Those are two birds that love rolling grassland habitat.
Vespers and Savannah.
Okay, Linda says a sparrow field trip is a wonderful idea. Cool.
Where in Mason County would you suggest? What are some hot spots for sparrows? Of the whole, a variety of sparrows, 3 or 4 sparrows.
Probably there's some rolling grassy farmland up in
maybe at Conrad Road by Pat's place.
there might be some there.
Where the bobolinks are?
Yeah, I guess the best thing is if you can get fields that are not hayed every single year, because if they're cut too early, that can destroy a lot of these breeding birds' nestings.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have to be a farmer that can wait until the end of summer before harvesting. It might allow a population to return every year and be reliable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think we can come up with a trip. Well, a trip that would be for field birds. So it would include all these field sparrows. So Vesper, Song, clay-colored we can include, and Savannah and bobolink. Bobolinks are not something people have no interest in. They have an amazing song, number one, and a very colorful bird. So and June or July would probably be the best time for a sparrow trip if we wanted to do something.
June or July, you said, Dave? June or July?
Well, June's better, and the first half of July. When you start to get into late July, then a lot of the young birds are out of the nest, and the adults are not singing as much.
Okay.
Too busy.
I don't have any other questions. I appreciate you providing the resource, The Sparrows of the U.S. and Canada, the photographic guide. That looks really, I need to study that because I'm about 5 or 6 sparrows in and then I'm lost.
Well, why don't I email those cover photos to you, Joe, and then you can distribute them, to Fred or whoever wants to distribute to all the members, if that's a possibility.
Linda just said that she has not heard a Henslow sparrow at the Arcadia grasslands.
Okay. I kind of thought I would have heard from her if she had.
Okay.
Well, thank you very, very much.
I know you appreciate these things, Mary. That's great.
I do.
Good.
I'm glad you could enjoy the program, and
Thanks, Dave. I know it takes an awful lot of work. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
yeah, I just wish I had photo or the songs of all of them, but it's like, well,
Oh, well.
sometimes life gets in the way, you know.
Well, we'll keep working at it.
Yeah.
And have a nice weekend, everyone.
Yes, enjoy the warm weather.
Yes.
Finally,
Yeah.
I don't have to burden my snowmobile suit anymore. Take care, everybody.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I know.